Hi, I'm Brenda Smith, a native of Stamford, Connecticut, and a member of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County. And today it's my extreme pleasure to be interviewing Irwin Miller, who is the founding president of the once Stamford Historical Society and now the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County. And Irwin is now a board member and the historian of the society, and he is also, I would say, the premier historian of the Stamford Jewish community. Irwin, it's a great pleasure to interview. I know you have many, many stories to tell us and much history to tell us. Okay. There is so much history in Stamford that you know about, but I want to know the history of you, Irwin Miller. Where were you born? Where were your parents from? And where did you grow up?
All right. I was born February 19th, 1926. I was the first. I'm one of three siblings, two other siblings. And I was the first of my family to be born in a hospital, the Jewish hospital in Brooklyn, in what was Prospect Heights. And my parents lived in Yorkville in Manhattan. And in 1925 bought the house in what was then called Flatbush, at 2139 East 19th Street, Brooklyn. And so I was raised there for the first 11 years of my life with my maternal grandparents. Unfortunately, my maternal grandfather, passed away there when we were living there 2 years. And we moved a couple of times after that. Those are during the dark days of the Depression. And my father was in the automobile renting business. He rented limousines with liveried chauffeurs. He had started with one car in 1923, and at one time had about 30 limousines, these Packard limousines. And so it was the second largest automobile renting company in New York, except for J.P. Carey. It was the biggest. And so things got very tough. He had to turn in his cars every 2 years because your customers expected recent models, and so things got very tough financially. And we gave up the house. We walked away from the house free and clear. That was his decision. And I moved into my first apartment when I was 11 years old at 628 East 17th Street in Brooklyn, and lived there for a few years, and then moved to Parkside Avenue, 225 Parkside Avenue in Brooklyn. In the earlier years, I really hadn't lived in a Jewish neighborhood. In fact, when we moved to the first apartment, well, let me just tell you, I'll just touch on one anecdote. There was one apartment my mother looked at 800 Ocean Avenue, Corder Beverly Road in Brooklyn. This is 1937. And she decided, well, we like it, and I looked at it also. And the following day, the agent called and she says, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, they do not rent to Jews."
Wow.
So
Incredible.
that was legal in those days.
What year was that?
1937. This is around May of 37, spring of 37. They don't rent to Jews. She says, "But we'll find something else for you." So they found 628 East 17th Street, which was owned, we found out later, by a Jewish attorney. But his Scotch superintendent told a cleaning woman, which we got a cleaning lady to come in and clean the apartment before we moved in. And he says, "You know, are these people Jews?" And she was Jewish, but she didn't look Jewish.
Funny you don't.
She looked like an Irish, maid. So she says, "Yes, I think they are." She knew it, but he says, "We didn't want any Jews here," and here he was working for a Jew who owned the house. So it was a neighborhood, and the street was all Christian. And so I don't know how maybe we were there a week or two, and I became friendly with a young fellow named Eddie Handow, and we were out in the street one day, and we see a few boys playing there, and I was 11 years old then. And we walked over and said, "Can we play some ball with you?" And one of them says, "Are you a Jew?" So I said, "What?" And I got flustered. I said, "What if I am?" Well, we don't play with Jews, see. So that was my first introduction. And
that's surprising in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Most people think of Brooklyn as being so Jewish.
Yeah. Well, they think primarily of Borough Park, Bensonhurst.
Right.
but that wasn't all parts of Brooklyn. Or if you lived in Crown Heights, for example, that was practically all Jewish. You know. But no, this was, and there were other incidents which we don't have time to go into now. But that was it. That you were baptized more or less into that era.
What about in the school? Were the Jewish kids off to one side?
Well, no.
I had their own group?
No, I went to public school 217 at Newkirk and Coney Island Avenue. It was a good walk, but I had no problems in the public school, in the elementary school, with anti-Semitism at all. Nor in high school. I went to Erasmus Hall High School.
Oh, that's a good school.
Yeah,
that was
it was a good school. Now it's
but it was a very Jewish.
Very good school.
A lot of Jewish
and it
kids.
Was a lot of Jews. Yeah.
Yeah.
James Madison, which was in the neighborhood where we had the house, that was even more Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
James Madison. Both very good schools.
Now, how did you? I think there's an interesting story about how you met your wife.
Yes, let me see if I can recall all that. I first saw her when she was about 11 years old, I guess, and I was about 14, and it was at my sister and recent brother-in-law's house, their apartment, on Ocean Avenue, Avenue I, and I recall her running through the rooms with her younger cousins, a couple of cousins there. It was really a fleeting glance. I had no interest. You know, I was 14 and she was and 11 years old. You know, I felt
she was a kid.
So, in any event, that was that. And the next time I saw her was when I was in the Navy, because I went into the Navy and I was dating another girl, and I really didn't know Vivian at that point at all, that part of the family. And so I came home on leave from the Pacific, and I called a cousin of mine. I'm not sure if he was in the Merchant Marine at the training station, Sheepshead Bay. It doesn't matter. But
in the military.
Don't get me started. I go into details. So in any event, I said, "How about let's go out, you know, and date." So he says, "Well, who are you dating?" I said, "Well, I'm dating this girl." He says, "But I don't have anybody. I don't know." He said, "Could you get me a date?" I said, "Listen, I've been away so long. How can I get you a date?" So I said, "Let me see what I can do." So I spoke to my sister, and she says, "You know, my niece," and that was Vivian, her husband's niece.
Right.
She's a cute kid. I said, "How old is she?" And I think he said she was 16. I said, "But I was 19. I was a big shot." So I said, "Well, she's a kid. I mean, you know." So I said, "Okay." So everything was arranged, and I gave my cousin her phone number. He called her, and this is a blind date for him. Vivian's a blind date, and we arranged to meet at the Capitol Theater and on Broadway in New York with my date, and Joan Crawford, I think, was playing.
You have amazing retention.
In Mildred Pierce, it was very good. And in any event, first, I think, so we met them later. We went for a ride in Central Park, one of those buggy rides, and so forth. Anyway, so but when I saw her, I said, "You know, this is more than a cute kid. I'm very interested." So after my leave was over, I was dating the other girl, and Stanley was with her. Somehow I got her address from my sister, and I wrote her, and she wrote me back, and we still have some of those letters.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And we started to correspond.
How long have you been married?
And we're married now 62 years.
Kinda.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
When I used to hear people marry 50 years, I used to think it was ancient.
That's right. So how did your route come to Stanford? I mean, you started in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And then how did you get here?
I got here because of a job.
Oh,
I was selling electronics for a wholesale radio and TV parts company in New York. Mm-hmm. And I said, "I've got to get out of there." I said, "Because here I have we already had 4 children."
Oh, wow.
And we had a little house on Long Island in Hicksville, which our children still laugh at the name. In any event, I said, somehow, and because I realized the space age was coming, and space age electronics was going to be the coming thing, and here I am selling radio TV parts, and this is not going to last forever. Things are going to change. So, but I didn't have the experience in that. It's a different aspect of electronics,
Absolutely.
totally different. And what do I do? So in any event, I think it was Vivian. We were reading the New York Times one Sunday, and these block ads in the wanted sections where they generally had jobs in engineering, that type of thing. And she sees this block ad with a box number, and we didn't know who it was, and they're looking for somebody with experience in selling to research labs and places like that, which I really didn't have the experience selling to that end of the electronic industry. But I wrote the letter, and a few weeks later I get an answer. I don't recall to call them, whatever, and I met with a search team in Madison Avenue, Crescent, McCormick, and Paget, and they liked what they saw and what they heard from me, and they said, we'll let you know. And about a month later they called me and they said, if you're still interested, we'd like to fly you to Boston and talk some more with the people up there. I said, who is the company? They wouldn't tell me before that. They said, it's the Radio Shack Corporation.
Oh, wow.
On Commonwealth Avenue in Boston. And I didn't know Radio Shack. I really didn't. I knew the big electronic company to me was Allied Radio, Lafayette Radio. That was the downstate in New York. You didn't know. Radio Shack was a nothing. So we went up there, and P.S. they said, well, if you're still interested, they spoke to me. They took me to lunch at the Harvard Club in Boston.
Lovely.
And I was hired. But they said, do you have any problem? I said, yes. I said, we have a house, and I'd like to move to Stanford. I said, but they said, well, we'll pay for your moving, but you'll have to sell the house on your own. I said, okay, that's a fair deal. So I commuted for about like 3 months, so the days before there was any Throgs Neck Bridge.
Oh, wow.
And but it wasn't all that bad. But it was getting tiresome after 3 months, and I was looking, and I knew certain areas of Stanford I didn't want to live in, and we could only afford. We had a very limited budget. And so, and I knew enough to look north of Bull's Head. No Cove, I said, this was 1960. It's 49 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I was looking at all kinds of places. Finally found this one. I found this one. We came here with Harry Grossman, who people knew around town. He was a nice fellow, real estate. And I said, we pulled up in front of the house. I said, I'm not even interested in this thing. And I walked inside, and I can't go into detail what it was like, some other time. So I said, I'll bring my wife up. We'll look at it, bring Vivian up. And I brought her up on a Saturday, and I said, don't look at it now. Just think what we can do with it. Because I've been looking now 3 months, and for what I can afford, in 1960, there was really nothing much. So we decided, okay, we'll take it. And just to give you some idea, I think right after we moved in, that night with the packing cases all over this living room floor, her parents, Vivian's parents, walked in, and they said, figure the prices of those days, they said, for this you paid $22,000? And of course that took the wind out of our sails right
So that
away.
was in 1960.
Yes, because Vivian's youngest sister and her husband had just bought a house in Wantaw, Long Island, for $22,000.
And they got a big house.
And they got a big split level, brand new construction, and we're going into a thing like this,
So what was your first experience in Stanford? How did you settle into the community? Did you get involved in anything? Did you join a temple?
Yeah, we joined. I looked around. We had been affiliated in Long Island with a few things, a few places. I was bar mitzvah in a Reform temple in Brooklyn, Avenue R Temple. Vivian came from a conservative background, so we're looking for something either in liberal conservative or Reform or whatever. And I think that the first contact we had was with maybe Rabbi Aaron Krantz of Congregation of Good Shalom.
That's right.
And it was still on Grove Street. He called me up, and he said, I'd like to come and visit you. So I think I knew of Rabbi Irwin at that point in the congregation, which was Orthodox. And I said, I think I should warn you beforehand. I said, neither my wife nor myself are Orthodox. I said, we don't like to sit separately for one thing. Mm-hmm. We like to sit together. And we've always been connected with, and in fact, we were in, at one point, members of Jewish Science. They had their own synagogue out in Old Bethpage,
Really?
near us. So he came from a very liberal religious background. So he says, well, let me come anyway. I said, you're welcome. You're always welcome in our home. I said, come anyway. He came with a friend, and they sat here leaving, and when he got all done, I recall him saying, well, what do you think now? I said, you're a great person. I said, but no. I said, Rabbi, I said, it's not for us. And that was it. So I recall we went to, I think we went to Temple Sinai. They were worshiping also in Grove Street, in the old, what had been the old St. John's Lutheran Church.
Yes,
it was
I remember.
a wooden
Absolutely.
structure with
Yes.
a steeple. And I recall it was some sort of a forum, and I spoke to Rabbi Silver at that time. But somehow we didn't like the atmosphere and so
The
forth.
church.
We felt at that point, that wouldn't even bother me, because the synagogues in the old days, even in New York, took over what had been churches, and so they converted them. So,
Right.
but it was just, it just wasn't what we had been used to, I guess. And so we went to Temple Bethel, and then I said, this is for us, because at that point, especially at that time, Temple Bethel was not even affiliated with the United Synagogue of America. It was called liberal conservative. That's what they had on their board.
Who was the
outside.
rabbi there?
And the rabbi was Rabbi Perlman.
Perlman.
David Perlman,
I grew up
who
with
had
his
come
son.
out of a somewhat reform background. He had been educated at the Stephen Wise's.
In Cleveland?
No, here in New York. It's now part of the Jewish Reform
Right.
Seminary. And so Stephen Weiss had founded it to train rabbis both for Reform and conservative, liberal conservative. So, and Perlman had come out of that. He had been at a Reform temple. He'd been the assistant rabbi and an educator in Cleveland at a very large Reform temple there. So, and they had the organ, which we were
Yes.
comfortable with, and they had.
So you joined Bethel.
And we joined Bethel at that point.
And you're still a member?
And no, not anymore. Not for many long time. Because we joined Temple Sinai in 1970,
Oh, okay.
and we remained in Temple Sinai for like about 18 years, I think.
Okay.
And I was chairman of the ritual committee at one point at Temple Sinai. And going back to Bethel for a moment, I got involved with the men's club.
Yes.
So I'm forgetting names, now, but
That's
there was
all right.
Alex Taylor, who came from an old Jewish Koskov family. Alex and I would make breakfast on Sunday mornings when the men's club had their meetings. We'd make lox and eggs and stuff like that. So we got involved, and Vivian got involved in National Council of Jewish Women and some other organizations at that point, which she can tell you about at another time.
Yeah, right.
But in any event, so that's how we met friends in the community. That was the way of meeting. It was wonderful.
Now, how did you get involved with the Jewish Historical Society?
That came out of the blue. Actually, I was always interested in Jewish history, American Jewish history especially, and I had heard that people said that this fellow Tobias Bernhard, they call it Tobias Bernard, but I call it Bernhard, was the first Jew in Stanford, and I always felt, I said, this can't be, I said, because this is on US 1, I said, which is the main highway in colonial days, leading from New York to Newport, Rhode Island to Boston. I said, Jews had to be here at one time, even if they didn't stay. I said they had to be here. And people gave me another name, and I wasn't comfortable with that. So in any event, I started to do a little bit of research on my own, and then I think it was Harry Alter told me about, he says, there's some people, I heard a few people talking about organizing a Jewish Historical Society. So he says they're going to have a meeting.
What year was that?
And this was 1982, this happened. So they had a meeting at the Jewish Center on Newfield Avenue, and it was in what is now our library. It belongs to the Jewish Historical Society, and the library wasn't even finished. I remember the walls were like cinder block. Nothing was finished, and we sat around on chairs that we found and stools, and I remember Barney and Selma Plotnick were there,
Oh, yes.
and a lot of the names I can't remember. There was Barbara Hotz was there, and
Was Louis Altman there? Was he involved?
no. Later on, I got very close to Louis Altman. He was
Great.
wonderful.
Wonderful.
In
man.
fact, I knew Louis Altman because he was the
Attorney for your.
So
that was in 1982.
82.
That was your first meeting?
that was our first in September. I have the first. I didn't go into detail like I should have, but it's a meeting where I wrote up a little one-piece page. Said the date was September. I can't remember what 1982, and then I can't remember how not long after that Barbara Hotz called me, and she said, I'm going to have a meeting at my home concerning an exhibit I'd like to do on Pacific Street. She was going for a master's, I think.
Yeah, and Sarah Lawrence.
And so I invited Ron Marcus to go with me because I felt he was active in the Stanford Historical Society, and he should be, and being Jewish, of course, he should be a part of this. And perhaps he can give us tips on, how these things run. So, in any event, he came with me, went to the Hotz home, and there were a lot of other people there whose names I can't remember anymore. And then Barbara, at the close of the meeting, said, Irwin, I know that you people, there's a group of us that want to form a Jewish Historical Society. In essence, I'm giving you not verbatim, but she said, I wonder if you could postpone the formation of it, because she says, I'm working on this exhibit of Pacific Street. Mm-hmm. And she said, if you would, and help us do that. I said to Ron, why don't we do that, And we did.
Oh, it was a wonderful.
And that was the beginning. And then it wasn't. We worked on that, and I agreed. I started calling people, and people are calling, looking for pictures for the Pacific Street exhibit, old timers in Stanford. And here I was, an interloper, an outsider, and they didn't know me. I said, I'd call them on the phone in the evenings after I get through with work. I said, this is Irwin Miller, and we're having this Pacific Street exhibit. Don't you have any old pictures of the attic or whatever? And trying to drum up. And so anyway, the exhibit was a great success. It was wonderful.
It was wonderful.
And
we did interviews. I did many interviews on that.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating to me because I grew up on Pacific. I mean, not on Pacific, but going to Pacific Street, so I knew it very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So from that.
That was that the Pacific Street exhibit opened, I think, in the spring of '83. Mm-hmm. And then in September or October, or Columbus Day of 1983, in the fall of '83, is when we had our first official meeting of the Stanford Jewish Historical Society. And then it was in a few months later, in January of '84, then we incorporated as the Stanford Jewish Historical Society officially. And I had been elected. They elected me the first president. That's how I got to be president. So.
And how long were you president?
5 years. 1983 to '88, and then George Goldberg.
But you've been involved in it ever since. Yeah. What sparked your interest in Jewish history?
Well, it's something that bothers me to this day, that Jewish children in religious schools even are not taught the history of the Jews in their own country, in the United States.
That's true.
They get out there, they're relating to, it's fine, you've got to teach the history of relating to Moses, but the children aren't relating to it, and it's a shame, because they get out and they have no idea. Many of them, some of them, I'll ask them a simple question as teenagers: did you ever hear of Chaim Solomon? No, never. Don't know anything about it. Do you know the Jews fought in the Civil War? No, have no idea. So, and as a result, many of these children are not alienated, but they're disinterested in the very ancient Jewish history. And so they don't really have an interest in that, and they're not getting the information concerning their own country here that they should be.
Now, how did your beginning Stanford Historical Jewish Society grow into this larger organization that it is now?
Well, we began with it was by word of mouth, and then calling people on the phone, and then we began with programs. I said the only way you're going to get people is programs, and
they've been fabulous.
What we did was, at that point, we worked on a very slim budget. You didn't have the means, to, so we'd call people up, professors, people in academia, outside the area, and in those days, I agree, it was easier to get people if you could persuade them, and so the people we were able to get, it was just marvelous, and that brought more and more was word of mouth.
And the Lower Fairfield, Connecticut aspect of the Historical Society, how did you get other towns and other people from other towns into?
Yeah, well, it was about 1995 we realized that we should be incorporating the neighboring towns, because they didn't have a Jewish Historical Society, and anything of Jewish relevance or history would be lost
Exactly.
if you don't do something. So we realized we'd also have to change our name and not be so provincial. So we changed it to the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Stamford, which incorporated New Canaan, Darien, Greenwich. At that point, Norwalk had its own, at that point, Norwalk Jewish Historical Society. In fact, they organized after us, when they heard about us, they called George Goldberg and myself, and we went to visit with Dr. Chuck Stupinski at his home in Norwalk, and with other people there, Bob Slavitt was a founding, and all those people, and because they wanted tips on how to organize a society like it and be successful like we had already become at that point. And so that was, and later on, of course, years later, they merged with us because their society, many of the Jewish community had moved to Westport. So it was about 1995 and 96 that we became the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Stamford. We called it Greater Stamford, which incorporated Greenwich, New Canaan, Darien, and so forth. And then it was in, I don't know if I have my years right, I can't, that's not,
It doesn't
it's too
matter
recent.
exactly. Yeah, but recently
Well,
you
we
became
changed that.
Lower
Now we're the
Fairfield.
Jewish, which it now incorporates Norwalk, which merged into our society, Westport, Weston, Wilton.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, Irwin, with your work and the Historical Society, Jewish Historical Society, you have written some books. You have done some very interesting books. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, Linda Balser and myself authored a book called The Jewish Communities of Greater Stamford. And this is a photo and text book published by Arcadia. And it's a marvelous book of photographs from our archives, from the Jewish Historical Society archives, with text, with the history of the organizations, and it covers the religious groups and the Jewish Center and individuals, people at the beach and people at the people at the Old Hebrew Institute and so forth. So there's pictures in there going back centuries, really. It's a marvelous book, which can be found, not only can be purchased from our society, but also at Barnes & Noble and Borders.
And at the library? Is it at the Stanford Library?
It's at the Stanford Library as well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's a
Wonderful
wonderful
book, yeah.
And you did something else, an addendum?
Yeah, Professor Samuel Koenig, who's a sociology professor, a fellow at Yale University in about 1938, did a study, was commissioned, I think, by the federal government to do a study of ethnic communities, and he did a study of a Jewish community, not of a very large city, but of a medium-sized city like Stanford. He picked on Stanford, even though he wasn't from here. And apparently, with the assistance of some of his students, sociology students, they canvassed Stanford at that time, about 1938, 39, and did a study of every aspect of the history of it. His history wasn't as complete as it is now, but it gives you a sociological history of Stanford. How many merchants there were, when they came, how.
Really? Where is this?
Now this book, we have the book for sale, our society, because we published that book in 1991. We had heard about it. Apparently, someone had come across it who wasn't even Jewish, I believe, at the Stanford Historical Society, mentioned it to Ron Marcus, and Ron and Lester Charlack went up to the state library. They found that the manuscript was up there, and were able to. They could tell you better than I could the mechanics of getting it.
Yeah.
And they got and they agreed to make a copy, the library, for us. And so we were able to finally. It took us. We didn't have the means to publish it, the financial means, but it took us about 5-6 years to do it, and we did it by 1991.
What was your role in?
And so I wrote the addenda, because I brought the early history, the early Jewish history, relating back to colonial days,
Right.
more up to date. Now we know even more. But the book is so thorough in its study of the Jewish community here, it's irreplaceable, and we have it for sale from our society.
Oh,
The book has been used as a text by Trinity College in Hartford.
really?
And for a number of years, they were ordering that book, and maybe now we should really get after them, because maybe now over the years, they've changed, of course, instructors or whatever. But they used to order on the average of, I think, about 20 books every semester, whatever.
And his history, according to my notes, was from 1889 to 1939?
That's what Professor Koenig...
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then you took it from that time?
My addenda really covers the earlier history, before
earlier.
Before 1889.
In your research, can you recall when the earliest Jews were in this area?
The earliest one I found that I researched, this is raw research now, was 1698.
Really?
And that was Abigail Levy Frank's father. Her father on that painting on the wall there.
Yeah.
Her father was Moses Levy, and he bought a slave. I came across this in a big ledger I found on a shelf, on an open shelf at the Ferguson Library. And I don't know what it was doing there. I have no idea. I saw this enormous ledger, which looked like the ones you see at the vault.
Yes.
In the old town hall. And I just happened to open it up, and I said, I'm going to look for a Jewish name in here. I flipped pages, and suddenly I see Levy. Moses Levy. And he bought a slave from Mary Turney, whose son built the Hoyt Barnum House, which still stands on Bedford Street.
That was the Historical Society.
Yes, that was the original Historical Society. And what happened was he built that house in 1699, 1 year after Moses Levy had been in Stamford. Now, if Moses Levy, whether he lived here, I don't know. Whether he just was passing through, possibly. But the copy I made from what I found in the ledger was that he had purchased a slave named Dinah from Mary Turney. And well, somebody might ask the question, well, how did Hoyt, who built that house, get the name Turney? Well, Hoyt was her first husband, and her son was from the first husband. But anyway, so Moses Levy, we don't know. He may have lived here for a time. We don't know. But the next Jewish presence in Stamford is of a fellow who lived here for a number of years.
Who is that?
Nehemiah Marks.
What's the name again?
Nehemiah
Marks.
M-A-R-K-S. And we have letters that I researched.
You know so much about Stanford's Jewish history and other areas. Let's talk about your personal history and where did your grandparents come from and their roots and your parents' roots. That would be
Okay.
And your children.
And my children. We have 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great grandson.
Wow. Wow.
So there's going to be a lot of descendants.
Where do they live? How many? Do you have boys, girls? What? Your
2
children?
2 girls.
Uh-huh.
The oldest son, Arthur, lives in Newtown.
Mm-hmm.
He's an attorney in Norwalk. And our youngest son, Glenn, is a dentist in Pennsylvania, in Richborough, Pennsylvania. And our oldest daughter, Laura, and her husband, Frank, live in Shelton.
That's nice.
And our youngest daughter, Barbara, formerly lived in Puerto Rico, but now lives in Florida, in Parkland, Florida. And our great-grandson, the son of our grandson, Michael, and his wife, Kara, live in Wallingford. So we still have family in Connecticut, but they are scattered here and there.
That is
Yeah.
Very lucky.
Yes, we're very fortunate. Very fortunate.
And you get
Yeah.
together for holidays?
Yes, we were all together last week for Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
It was in Shelton. It was marvelous.
That's
It was marvelous,
fabulous.
yeah.
That's fabulous.
So,
Now let's get back to your grandparents.
Yeah.
Were they born in America? Were they immigrants?
no, they were immigrants. My maternal side, they were German Jews. But my grandmother's family and my grandfather's family, members of that family, had been coming here from before the Civil War. But they had come later. My grandmother came here for the first time at the age of, they have her down on the immigration record as a spinster, as 21, but she was really 19. The year was 1880 when she came.
Wow.
And she had an aunt and uncle here, living in New York. And after about a year, she decided she didn't like it anymore because they were treating her like a governess for their children. And she wasn't used to it. Her father, whose picture, by the way, I have here, these are my great-grandparents. That picture was taken 137 years ago.
Oh, that's wonderful.
In Germany. These are my great-grandparents here. He's with his Prince Albert coat and mutton chops. And the tallest girl here is my grandmother. This picture was taken in 1872 in the capital city of Posen. And her younger sister and a younger brother here. She had an older brother who was already in America by that time. He had come in 1871. My great-grandfather apparently had a very profitable freight forwarding business, but I think he realized that there weren't the opportunities for his children as there were for him, and they were suddenly moved to relatives who were already here.
And where did he live? In Europe? Where?
In Posen. They lived in a town called Millislau,
Which is
in Posen, in the province of Posen.
Which
Originally, before 1793, that area had been Polish. It was Western Poland.
All right.
But Friedrich Wilhelm, the Kaiser, they took that part of
Poland and made it part.
Posen and became German. And of course, the Poles hated the Jews because they felt that the Jews were like a fifth column for the Germans, because once the Germans took over, they insisted that Jewish children must go to a secular school and learn the German language.
That's right.
and become Germans, and not go to the Jewish, they could go to the Jewish religious schools, but their primary school had to be, and this is why they assimilated, which was really beneficial to them.
To Germany, of course.
Because it enabled them to get into the business world, and when they came here, they melted in a lot more easily than others who were forced to go to just the religious schools or their own secular schools and didn't have the advantages.
I noticed there's color in that photograph. How did
That was hand colored later.
Oh, okay.
That was hand colored later.
That's a wonderful.
I have the originals. But I don't keep them out in the open
because you're afraid that
they're in sepia.
Yeah.
They're similar. That's my mother over there, taken about over 100-something years ago.
That's so
110
precious.
years ago.
That's so precious to have that.
I can show you my wall in there. We have two walls in there: an ancestral wall with my family and an ancestral wall of Vivian's family on the other wall.
That might be interesting.
Yeah,
Maybe we could do that.
I can show you that if you're interested in photographing any of that. But I noticed Bernie's pointing to the camera that way. That's a picture of our latest addition to the family. That's my grandson and his son, our great-grandson Declan over here.
How cute.
So anyway, that's. But in any event, so my grandmother came, went back for a year, and then in 1886, they came back. She was married after she went back, and came back with a 6-month-old son to New York, and that's where they settled.
She was a lucky woman to have come back.
Yeah.
Did you have any family that stayed in Europe, or did they all immigrate?
Yes, she as far as I know, that younger boy, the little boy there, and her youngest sister, they stayed. Now the little boy I traced many years ago, and I think he died before the Holocaust in Berlin. They lived in Berlin, and the girl I couldn't trace because I don't know what her marriage name was, and I have no idea. Women, it's a lot harder to trace because the names change.
Yes.
And so that's my great grandfather had 2 brothers One of them served in the Confederate Army, came here before the war. They came before the war. And then his younger brother came, and that's another story. The younger brother went AOL from the Confederates. After he agreed to serve for his brother, after his brother had served 2 years, I think, but then he went. He didn't like it, I guess. So that's another story I won't go into right now. But in any event, so that was that family. And then my grandfather's family also had relatives, but my grandfather came in 1886 with my grandmother when they were married, and they lived in 1892. They were living on Sheriff Street, Lower East Side, and then they moved up to by I think about the time of the Spanish. No, before that they moved up to East 8th Street, near Tompkins Square Park, which was called Kleine Deutschland. It was called Little Germany. There were so many Germans there. And so they remained there till about 1904, and the Germans were moving to Yorkville, and they went with them. And my mother remembers the sinking of the General Slocum that time, and it's an interesting story, but it gives you an insight into some of the events that were happening in those days. And so somewhere about my mother said she rode in the moving wagon. It was a moving wagon with horses. They moved from East 8th Street up to first East 98th Street near Lexington Avenue. And this is about it must have been about 1905, because she said they sat her on some of the belongings on this the moving men put her on and they with the horses, they went up to East 98th Street. And then my grandparents moved to 172 East 82nd Street, and they remained in Yorkville, basically. And my mother met my father. That's another story. She was a cashier for Green Hut's department store, which is down on 6th Avenue and 18th Street. That was Ladies' Row. A lot of the big department stores were there. Siegel and Cooper, and those stores. B. Altman was originally there at one time. And so then somehow my father came in with a friend of his. He wasn't even, I don't know what he was doing there. He was a bookkeeper. That's my father did it. And he met my mother. He liked what he saw. And he says to me, he asks his friends to go and ask her if he would go out with her or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, they were engaged for 4 years, as people in those days, did. And they were married in 1913. So my mother was a cashier. Later on for Gimbel's. When they first opened in New York, that was about 1911, I guess. I don't know, 1910. And
another Jewish family.
Yeah, and they weren't even from New York. The Gimbel's, they weren't.
I don't think people knew Gimbel's.
Yeah, sure, Gimbel's was. And in any event, they and their first apartment was on East 82nd Street in Yorkville, and they remained there till they bought the house in Brooklyn. My brother and sister were born, and I mean born on the kitchen table or whatever it was at that time, and that's the way they grew. There was a small Roman Catholic church next to the house. The buildings are still there. And now they get all kinds of money for those apartments, but the neighborhood is now very upscale. And
absolutely.
In any event, that's that part of the story. My father's people came from a different background. My father's people came from Suwałki, which is northeast Poland. It's like a northeastern. It's between Belarus and East Prussia, and they came from a town called Seny, S-E-Y-N-Y, which is now. It's amazing. Both my paternal grandmothers and my paternal grandfather both came from the same town, Seny. And the family had lived there since about the 1750s, which is amazing to a genealogist I once spoke with years ago, Alex Friedlander, a very well-known Jewish genealogist. He said, they must have had basically a good life there for Jews to remain in a town that long, because generally things got tough, especially in those areas for Jews. He says, and apparently there were times when they had it a little tough, but he said, but overall, they remained there. And My paternal grandmother's. Well, she was married over there with my paternal grandfather, and then they came here. He came in 1895, and he came first, and that's another story. And he was here, I think, about 5 years, 4 to 5 years, before my grandmother came with the rest of the family, with her children. There were 4 children that came. And her father had come a little bit earlier. Her father came, I think, about 1891, came to New York with an older son from his second marriage, but he settled in Montreal.
Oh.
And so their descendants, and I'm close with a few of them. We used to go there when I was much younger. We go to visit them once a year.
In Canada.
In Canada, Montreal, yeah. A lot of them now have left Montreal, but
Yes.
I still have a cousin who's done marvelous genealogy, and I have a big spiral-bound genealogy of my father's family that she and I worked on. But she's such a whiz with the computer, and Bernie Levy knows Merle. Merle Kastner is her name. She's a marvelous person, you know. And so thanks to her, this thing was put together. There's copies now in the American Jewish Archives, the American Jewish Historical Society.
Of the Miller family.
Of my father's family, going back to about 1740.
The name Miller, did that come from?
No, the name was Milnarski. Now a Milnar in Polish is a Miller, and a ski is son of. And it's true, because Alex Friedland had traced me, about 1985, and he traced back, he went through old records because his family came from a town not too far away from mine, see. I think they came from, I don't know if it was right near the East Prussian border, Rochki, I think. And so he found that my great, this is interesting, my great-great-grandfather was a coachman on that side, of that Milnarski side. Had been a coachman, and my father was in the liveried limousine business over here.
Isn't that interesting?
And his father, my great-great-grandfather, was a miller, had a small mill. That's where they got the name from. So they took a name of an occupation. Now my grandmother, my paternal grandmother's name was originally Garbarski. Now what is a gerba? A gerba, G-A-R-B-A-R, well that's a Yiddish pronunciation of gerba. A gerba in German, of which Yiddish is a derivation, is a tanner.
Oh.
So his ancestor, not him, as far as we know, but one of his ancestors was a tanner. And ski, of course, means son of a tanner. So there you the occupation. So Merle Kastner has it's the Garbarski.
That's so interesting.
And his older brother, like Merle found relatives, that we never knew we had. My great grandfather's older brother, his family went to South Bend, Indiana, in the 1880s.
Why?
And settled there. We don't know why. Well, they went to. We have a picture of one of them pedaling with a wagon to farm women out in the middle of a field someplace. But anyway, that's. But
that's so interesting. It's very interesting.
How families scatter, and where they settle and so forth. And we went to a conference of the Southern Jewish Historical Society, Vivian and myself, some years ago, and we finally met up with my grandmother's family's southern cousins in Charleston over there. So different backgrounds.
Very interesting.
Anyway.
Very interesting.
So
you did you keep the mother's family, your grandmother's family, on your maternal side?
Yeah.
They all came here to New York?
No. As I mentioned, my grandmother's, my maternal grandmother's, one older brother did come here.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He first went to Texas, and then he settled.
How did you get interested in history and genealogy?
My father must have been. Unfortunately, my parents separated. My parents were divorced in later years, but my father must have been, and I never really got to know him because of the nature of his business and his anguish over his business and saving it, which and going through the Depression, and finally he was able to sell it during World War II, and decided to go west. But But he took us all to, he loved his history. And he took us to Washington when I was 4 years old in 1930. And I recall sitting in the President Hoover was president, and they lined little children up outside the Oval Office that time to go have maybe 10 seconds, whatever it was, to sit in the president's chair. Hoover was away on a fishing trip. So I sat in the president, I recall that split moment, you know, and they said, okay, next. No, you were out of there.
And you can remember.
But he took us, but my father took us to Gettysburg, you know, and we got, in those days you got a private guide. The guide came with us. We all fit in the car, and so that was my really first exposure I can recall. I recall then in 1937, we'll skip now, the 37, I decided to write a letter to President Roosevelt. And in those days you didn't have copy machines. I mean, we did it at home. So I don't have a copy of what I wrote. But I did get an answer, which I still have, on White House stationery, from Missy LeHand, who was FDR's private secretary. And I still have it downstairs.
Isn't that the one he had an affair with or something?
Yeah, it was one of his escapades. Sure.
Yes.
That was the beginning, you know, and then I was always interested in the Civil War ever since Gettysburg, you know, at that point.
Right.
So on Memorial Day, I began to see pictures of the last Jewish Civil War veteran, and so I contacted these people, and another Civil War veteran who had been in many battles who wasn't Jewish, but I went to visit these people. I wanted to get firsthand accounts, and the Jewish veteran, I still have his stuff, you know, all his the things that he gave me, you know, a few things. Daniel Harris, and he was the last of the 9,000 to 10,000 Jews who served in the Civil War. So getting first-hand accounts of this, you know, began to really spark my interest.
What are you going to do with all that information you've collected?
Well, a lot of my children, some of them would like to have it. Some grandchildren would like to have it, I think. If they don't, I've left instructions that it be given, that all the stuff can be just shipped to the American Jewish Historical Society in New York or the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So that they will be preserved. I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, sure.
So you've had a lifelong interest in history.
Yeah. Yeah. Ever since that time.
You should write your memoirs.
Yeah. And
you should really write your memoirs of these experiences.
That's what my family keeps telling me.
You should. Or just talk into a tape recorder and all these things.
Yeah. Because I tend to ramble, and I'll go on a tangent.
No. But you have so many.
Of my maternal ancestors, the oldest picture we have here. Well, the oldest. These are my great grandparents, and my grandmother in this picture, taken in 1872. This is my great grandmother here, taken in Berlin when she was 107.
Oh wow.
She lived to 111. I know that from my granduncle, who I mentioned in my one of the papers.
I hope you have her genes.
No one had her genes after her. None of her grandchildren, and she had a number of them.
She just wore a dress.
This is my great grandmother here. That's Rachel Pincus, and this is my grandaunt. She was a first cousin of this person here. There were no descendants, but this is probably the largest tintype you'll ever see, hand-colored. It was taken in New York.
That's fabulous.
By 1870. And these are my grandparents here, my grandfather, grandmother with my mother's older brother. These are my parents here. This was an engagement photo. Handsome. This is the ship that my grandparents came on in 1886 to New York. This we found in a maritime museum in Baltimore. That's my grandmother's older brother who came here, didn't like it, went back, and here he is in the Prussian army here with his cavalry sword. That's my grandfather. There's my mother as an infant here, and here she is here, and here she is in her marriage photo, and there she is in her later years, and my great grandparents here again. Now this is me, my first sailor suit up here.
That's adorable.
And here I am in my real sailor suit from World War II.
Who's that couple on top?
And that's my parents up there.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
a handsome couple.
Yeah. And that's my grandfather's citizenship papers up there. In those days, they used to
Yeah.
give you a big one.
They're wonderful.
This is a map of Prussia here, and actually there is the names of the city and town where my maternal great-grandparents, my maternal grandparents came from.
And what is this picture here? This modern picture of the carnival line here with.
Oh, this was just taken about a year ago when we went to a. No, I'm getting mixed up here. No, this is the carnival cruise that we took all our family, our children and grandchildren, almost all of them. It was difficult to get everyone together, of course, but we almost did, and we went to Nova Scotia
How
on a
wonderful.
cruise.
That's wonderful.
So this is us getting ready to board the ship.
And what's this New York Times article?
Yeah, that's an original copy of the New York Times of April 15th, 1865, Lincoln's assassination.
Really?
And this gives you the account the day after that Lincoln was shot.
There's a lot
It's
of.
an original. What was interesting when I got this paper here on the inside, there was a synagogue in West 39th Street, which is now the Garment District, well, it was the Garment District. There was, at that time, it was residential. And this is our granddaughter Ashley's bat mitzvah. You better edit this. You better cut. But I'm looking. This is our granddaughter Ashley, and I'm looking to see whether who's bat mitzvah.
This looks like is this her, the one in the middle? Is that the?
Demi? No.
All right, don't worry about what it is exactly.
Well, anyway, it's almost all our family. I want to because once you get it on DVD and you get
Yes.
because we had any number of bat mitzvahs and
I can imagine.
photos of our family, of our immediate family. And at the top here is Vivian and mine and ours wedding photo of August 24th, 1947. This I put up here. It's a wedding photo of Vivian's first cousin, but it shows us what we looked like about 1951 here at that time. This is Arthur, our son Arthur's wedding, Arthur and Lauren's wedding photo. This is our son Glenn and Sandra's wedding. This is Laura and Frank's wedding. That's about 1971, I believe it was. And this is Arthur and Lauren's wedding here. And our daughter Barbara and Elon's wedding. And these are our two of our grandchildren's weddings so far.
Interesting things to say. Is there anything else you would like to tell us? I mean, we talked about your family's background and how you came to Stanford and about your children and the development of the Jewish Historical Society. But there's so much more. We could go on and on.
Yeah, and it has to, something that has to trigger my.
I know.
particular
Well,
subject
we've
matter.
had a very interesting interview.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much.
Well, I thank you all for coming, and I enjoy sharing the information with you.
It's wonderful. It was a gem.
Thank you.
Yep.